Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Hallmarkies podcast. And we are here to talk about all things the second season Christmas special for all creatures, great and small. This is a wonderful episode of television. I'm so excited to talk about it. I'm film critic Rachel Wagner, and Michelle's here.
Hey everyone.
How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm excited to talk about this one. I was just saying to Rachel that I'd completely forgot pretty much everything,
I
and
know,
I
me
had it in
too.
my head that when it started, I was like, this must have been like a sort of filler
Mhm.
kind of storyline. So yeah, it was a bit of a pleasant surprise when I got so caught up in it and I was like sobbing at the end.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking, do I like this one better than the first one? It's hard because that first one is just perfection. But
Yeah.
this one had so many nice moments. I was just, oh,
Yeah. I think this one I liked a little bit more just because the amount of payoff because we've known these
uh-huh.
characters for so long.
Yeah,
So
I
when
can see
so
that.
yeah, when they show up at Mrs. Pumphrey's, you realize how what a big deal that is and how
Yeah.
much it means. So yeah, I feel this one got me a little bit more emotionally.
This is one of those things that I feel like if somebody can't at least recognize the value in this episode of television, I'm like, I don't, can we be friends? I don't know. It's so good. I, I just loved it so much. And uh, and and it, I think this one, I don't know if you can tell that the budget, but this episode looked absolutely beautiful. I mean,
Hmm.
just all the detail with everything from the Christmas trees to the garland to the it was they they did just such an incredible job. It
Hmm.
looked beautiful.
Yeah, and I think they did a good job as well of like the house is sort of set up the same way that it was last year, but it still
Uh-huh.
felt kind of fresh and new.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like we know sort of that Siegfried is, he plays Father Christmas and they have the whole town over. Like I was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I was a little bit worried of like, oh, this just going to be like a rehash of the previous one.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like they had that the sort of the party
Yeah.
being sort of a very small but important
Oh,
part of the episode.
yeah. Yeah. Well, it's called The Perfect Christmas. And it's James and Helen spend their first Christmas together, but must agree on where to spend it. Despite all seeming idyllic, the vets are troubled as Tricky Woo is sick. Yeah. And I think it's really satisfying. And the last one was fun because you had the kind of will they won't they of between Helen and James and in this whole thing with her wedding and everything. Uh, so that was fun. But this is also fun to see them as like an established couple, basically, now trying to navigate everything. And I know that that can be very tricky as a couple. Where are we going to spend? Where are we going to spend the holidays? That can be a lot of drama.
Yeah, and there's so much that they haven't spoken about,
Mhm.
in terms of just where they're going to live and
Yeah.
um, all of those details. But I do like the fact that we got this episode because it was a chance to sort of see them as like an engaged couple because, you know, back in those days they got married very quickly. We see in this episode that oh God, what's her name? Tristan's
Oh, Maggie.
Maggie's engaged and she's sort of getting married very quickly.
Hmm.
And so, Helen and James are sort of the same. So it was a
Yeah.
nice moment of just sort of seeing
Hmm.
them be a couple,
Yeah.
an engaged couple for a little bit.
Well, and it was so funny with Tristan putting mistletoe everywhere because he's hopeful
Yeah,
about Maggie.
yeah. I think yeah, he did that in the first Christmas episode, so he's kept up the tradition.
Yeah, and Mrs. Hall's like, oh my gosh. One thing that was interesting to me with Mrs. Hall is that there Mrs. Brompton is trying, Diana is trying to get her to ask Gerald to the party and then to Christmas lunch. And she says that she's married.
Yeah,
I
so
was
I think that, yeah, I was confused about that as well. So I think the situation is that her husband was abusive and she left him, but
mhm,
she is still technically married.
mm,
Um,
okay.
I'm not sure if he has passed away,
Yeah,
or
that
the
because I was thinking he was
or
gone. He
in
was dead.
prison, or yeah, I'm not 100% sure what the situation is there, but
Mhm,
I do remember the fact that he was abusive and she left him.
yeah,
But yeah, I think the issue is that she is still technically a married woman.
yeah. So we have this Mr. Kitson, and this is an interesting dynamic. So he's the farmer, and he really resents having to call the vets,
Yeah.
and I think particularly James because he's not from that town. He probably gives Siegfried a certain degree of slack. But he says, I know my animals better than you, and he's like, you're gonna charge me for doing this, and James is like, yeah, like any other business,
Hmm.
and and so what happens is he comes to give a antiseptic, an antibiotic to this cow. James sees this sheep that is suffering, struggling,
Hmm.
and but the guy says, no, that's not what they need. Uh, you know, go away. And he just can't see, an animal suffer, and so he gives him the same injection, gives the animal the injection, and so the next day, he goes up there, and the he lies, the farmer lies and says that the sheep died,
Hmm.
and so just prove this, supposedly he's right or whatever, and but he actually did make it.
Yeah. And I think this guy just resents having to pay cash money more than anything else.
Hmm.
So I don't know what his sort of, because we do learn that um in previous episodes that veterinary as a sort of a science is more of a new thing,
Hmm.
that originally it was sort of just you know things, treatments that were sort of passed on, and the sort of farmers were their own sort of vets. So
Hmm.
maybe he's not used to treat like paying money for these types of things. Like maybe he's more used to, you know, you do me a favor by helping my animals, I'll do you a favor by, something else.
Yeah.
Maybe that's his sort of currency. Um, but yeah, he was so frustrating, and when I think when you find out the fact that the sheep, the ewe was lambing, and the lamb was sort of not in the right position, and that's something that they should have called James or Sigrid to sort of get the lamb in the right position to take out. He didn't. He just took the lamb out in the position that it was in, and that's just like that's unthinkable. The amount of pain that animal must have been in, and the
Yeah.
fact that he's not even going to give it, you know,
Hmm.
a death that it deserves. That he's just going to let it suffer,
Yeah.
until it passes away, and not even pay whatever the amount was for some kind of painkiller, something to help the animal along its way. But yeah, he's very unlikable, like really
Yeah,
unlikable.
well, and very prideful,
Yeah,
that
I think
that
this is the most villainous character we've actually
yeah.
got.
Well, and the idea that somebody knows something that he doesn't know, especially about his
Yeah,
animals, is very,
yeah,
like, offensive.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
he's just got no respect for the science
Hmm.
of veterinary. And
Yeah.
that's something we see later on in
Well,
the episode be discussed.
just the idea that anyone knows something he doesn't know
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
is, and some people are just so cheap. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, I think Helen says he's got deep pockets and short arms.
Yeah.
Ho, ho, ho! We'd like to take a second and thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast. It's the Hallmarkies Patreon.
Do you love Hallmarkies podcast, especially at Christmas?
Do you enjoy the holiday previews, recaps, interviews, and bonus episodes?
If the answer is yes, please consider supporting the Hallmarkies Patreon. We need your help to do what we do both during the Christmas season and all year round.
But not only do you help a podcast led by strong, independent women by becoming a Patreon, you get to become a part of the Hallmarkies family.
Starting at only $2 a month as a patron, you will have access to our Facebook Patreon group where we talk about the movies, shows, and more all year.
We also have many monthly patron watch-alongs with guests like Lacey Chabert, Natalie Hall, Paul Campbell, Mary Lou Henner, and more, giving their behind-the-scenes details of their films.
As a patron, you also have the chance to provide input into the podcast and even join us at different tiers.
So this Christmas season, spread some cheer to the Hallmarkies Patreon and become a member today. You won't regret it.
Go to patreon.com/hallmarkies to learn more.
That's patreon.com/Hallmarkies.
So we have this problem where so Jenny is preparing food for Christmas lunch,
Mm-hmm.
and then also Mrs. Hall is preparing big meal, and so Helen and James are struggling with what to do because they don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. But yeah, I think it's a real thing that couples have to deal with. It's hard.
Yeah,
What are you gonna do?
that's definitely like a real thing of like, where's the trade-off? Like, are we
Hmm.
going to do alternate years? Are we gonna, if we can't be all together, we can't have two families together, then what's the alternative?
Yeah.
Um, and I was really prepared for the alternative being this one of like them both going to both of them, like them both
Yeah.
like having two Christmas lunches, which I mean I love a Christmas lunch, but yeah, I'm not into yeah, not with the size of that goose that Jenny was cooking
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah, I think it would be a lot, but I don't know. Maybe they could have one be Christmas dinner.
Hmm.
They both have to be Christmas lunch. Maybe Jenny's could be a Christmas dinner.
Yeah, it's funny because like Christmas lunches are, it's sort of the done thing here. Like we don't really have Christmas dinners. It's
Hmm.
all Christmas lunches, but I always have a Christmas dinner. Like I've been like my whole life I've had Christmas dinners because my mum's type 1 diabetic and so
Oh.
she can't eat a meal that early on in the day.
Mm,
So she has to sort of have it along with her insulin later on in the day. So yeah, the time everybody's had their dinner, have had their lunches and I'm like still cooking mine.
yeah. Well, I think the reason why we do Christmas lunches is because usually start the day so early.
Yeah.
At least when we were little, it's like we used to sometimes my parents, because of course they were up, late into the night, and they would send us to watch Charlie Brown. And it was usually the thing. It's too early, go away. And but we would want it to, I mean, at least like 6 7 for sure. We would, when we were little, we gotta go, get the presents. And we would always do our stockings first, and my mom and dad would make us take a picture with us in age order,
Hmm.
standing, waiting, come on. uh, yeah, and then we get our stockings. We always had an orange in our stocking.
Hmm.
uh it's like a thing.
Yeah.
And
I've been doing the Christmas lunches myself the last like few years.
mhm.
A little bit different because I lost my gran at the end of last year, so always did hers sort of separate and we'd like
Mhm.
deliver it, so it's a little bit strange. I won't have that this year. I've had a few losses
Yeah.
in my life this year, so it'll just be like a
Yeah.
different
Yeah, that will be hard.
Christmas this year. But yeah, it's sort of like I love a Christmas lunch, but yeah, I would sort of resent the fact that in Boxing Day it's like you have Christmas lunch leftovers. There's so much food left
Oh,
over that
yeah.
you have to have it all over.
Well, we actually generally have our like large meal on Christmas Eve, actually, in our
Hmm.
my family, and we're, Wagner's, and so we have a traditional German meal for our Christmas Eve dinner. my mom takes this sauerkraut and she boils it in apple juice all day, or she cooks it, simmers it, and it's so good. And I've tried to make it, and it's not, I don't know, it's not as good as when she makes it. But it's got that like sweet sour, that's so
Yeah.
good. And then she makes these sandwiches with bratwurst and sausages and potato salad, German potato salad. It's delicious. But I feel like I don't know anybody else who has quite the and then we almost always have fondue because my mom's gluten
Mm-hmm.
she can have gluten, so that's it. That's our uh a lot of times our dessert of choice because you can just pick whatever you want, dip the chocolate fondue. But do you have any traditional that you have for your Christmas lunch?
Christmas lunch is always turkey, but
Yeah.
again, I think it'll be sort of different because my mom and I are the only ones that actually like turkey. Um, it's just if you don't cook it right, it can be very dry. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, I
It's
think I
even
might just do chicken this year. I think we might just go chicken.
yeah.
Um, everybody will happy with that. But yeah, Christmas Eve is always sort of takeaway. Um,
Yeah.
Boxing Day sometimes is takeaway as well. Just depends on the year, I guess.
Well,
But yeah.
Jenny, she's making the goose, like you said, and then she is soaking the pudding in
Mm-hmm.
brandy for a month.
For a month.
And and that is something that has just, I think, fallen out of favor. That kind of pudding like that. I mean, I've had some sticky toffee pudding that was pretty good, but I think at least I definitely don't like dried fruit that much, and those kinds of puddings, Christmas puddings, were like very heavily on the dried fruit. And it's the same thing with fruit cake, because that's all dried fruit. It's just not as popular now as it was then.
Yeah. Yeah, Christmas pudding is still ridiculously popular here.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah, yeah. I
Oof.
love Christmas pudding. I
Oh,
love
you
it. It's so
do?
good.
So
Yeah,
sweet. So sweet.
so good. See if you get a really good one, and I think, and I think it's my one of my grands that got me onto this of like they sell a lot of like individual ones.
Hmm.
So in the lead up to Christmas, I will always just try all these individual ones and try and find the best one. And that way you get to have so much Christmas food. But yeah, if you get like a really good aged one, like a really good one that's it's not
Hmm.
dry and you cook it nice, it's so good.
Yeah.
It's so good. I've never tried to make one my own when I'm on. I'm not as brave as Jenny. I've always just got a store bought. Um, yeah, but I do like all of that stuff and
Uh-huh.
the mince pies, which are fruit, dried fruit as well. That's sort of not dried fruit. It's sort
It's
of
just
like
so sweet. I think that's the hard, and I guess if you have the maybe that's the point of the liquor, is to sort of add a
mix it
bitter
up a bit.
note
Yeah,
to
yeah,
the dried fruit. But
yeah. And
but yeah.
there's just so many like mince pies that are really not good. They're very dry, and
Hmm.
again, you just sort of
Maybe
have to
that's my
find.
problem as I
You just have to find the good ones.
hmm I have had, like I said, I had sticky toffee pudding, but just a little, those usually are a little lighter on the dried fruit. But had you ever heard of this Kaliak tradition?
I
The
haven't actually. Yeah, it's. I know the name. I've heard
Mhm.
the name, but I've never actually heard of anyone actually doing a Caliate tradition or anything like that.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So James, he finds this cool piece of wood at Mr. Kitson's house, and he, I guess it's his dad's tradition to carve old woman winter into the wood, and and then burn it on Christmas Day. And that's like a
Hmm.
tradition, and that was a really nice little plot. James connecting with his roots and his family because he's feeling bad not being there with his family, and in the what had happened with the announcement and them leaving and everything. And so it was I thought a nice little moment for the character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, let's say it's definitely like a tradition that definitely hasn't been passed on in any of both sides of my family. But yeah,
Mhm.
it seems like it's a very fairly well known sort of Scottish custom. Um,
It's just such a thoughtful
don't have log
character.
fires.
You
Don't
know,
have log fires anymore.
James is
Mm-hmm.
just such a thoughtful character, you know, and I just thought it was him like taking the second to find the wood, to remember this, to do it, with everything going on. I just always appreciate just like how thoughtful he is.
Yeah, I do wish they had done sort of a different Robbie Burns poem. I guess Old Lang Syne is probably the most traditional and the most sort of apt, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there's just so many good ones. It would have been nice to sort of hear
Yeah.
him.
I've only ever heard it as a song.
Have you heard like the proper Scottish version of it?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, because
No.
I think the majority of people mostly hear sort of the sort
Yeah.
of more
An
sort
old
of
acquaintance before God. Yeah. That's the only
yeah.
I've ever heard.
I'll have to send you like the proper Scottish one. Like
I would love that.
Paolo Nutini is a Scottish singer songwriter. He'd covered it for our Hogmanay celebrations.
Oh, really?
Um, yeah, like a few years back, and it's one of the
Mm-hmm.
first times I'd heard like the proper traditional Scottish version of it, the proper Rabbie Buns version of it. So yeah, I'll have to send that to you.
Yeah, that'd be cool. That'd be cool. So then we have Mrs. Hall and Gerald doing this little tit for tat, and he's like, you know, it's okay if we're just friends, and they, you know, sort of the back and forth between them, pretty cute.
Yeah, I really like Gerald, but I also sort of feel like he's a bit of a wounded puppy. Like I feel he's got that sort of
Yeah.
mannerisms and sort of I don't know, the sort of aura around him. I'm like, oh,
Uh-huh.
don't hurt him. Don't.
Yeah, and then there were like little hints at Siegfried and Mrs. Hall, like when he sees her in her beautiful dress, which is like he's like, you look beautiful, something different, you know, about you. And then, you know, she tells him, oh, you should ask Mrs. Brompton, and Diana, and it doesn't have anywhere to go. And it's so he's like, well, it could raise certain expectations. And then Diana says that back to him later on, which was cute. It was funny.
Yeah, I've got a feeling, and I could be wrong, but I've got a feeling that they're endgame, that Mrs. Hall and Siegfried are
Yeah.
endgame.
I
Yeah.
never really noticed it the first time I watched it, I have to say. But on this watch, I think you said that in an early recap, and oh yeah. And then now, like, there's that moment when they're listening to the broadcast when they put a hand on each other,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, it's like a pretty little intimate moment. And yeah, I could see it. I definitely could see it.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the Downton Abbey couple that they remind me of. Oh God, it was a downstairs relationship.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I know which
Woman
one you're
that sort
talking about.
yeah, the
Mm-hmm.
butler and the woman that takes care of the house.
Oh
Not Anna
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Bates.
Hughes and Mrs.
Yeah,
Hughes
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah. It
Carson.
reminds me a little bit of that.
Yeah,
So I
I can
feel
see that.
like, yeah, I feel like if they ever get together, it's going to be in the last season. Because I feel
Yeah.
like they are like endgame, like right at the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that. I can see that.
Hey, this is Jen Johans, host of the podcast Watch with Jen, which delivers a steady stream of great movie recommendations, thoughtful career deep dives, and first-rate conversations with film critics, authors, actors, journalists, filmmakers, and more. You can find Watch with Jen wherever you get your podcasts or hear us first at our Patreon at patreon.com/filmintuition.
So we have poor little Tricki. He is not feeling well at all. and Mrs.
I
Pumphrey
felt so
is
bad. Like my dog had that gastro. God, what was it called?
gastroenteritis.
My dog had that like when he was a year old. Had to go to the vet and stay in overnight, and
Oh,
it was really scary. Like how a bug can just wipe them out, like completely wipe them out. And it was the same thing of like couldn't hold down food, couldn't hold down fluids,
mhm.
like completely dehydrated in a space of like 24 hours. Like it was really
Yeah,
scary.
yeah,
And I felt so bad for Mrs. Pumphrey because, as we see, he's sort of the only thing that she has, and it looks like she'd also sent all of her staff home as well. So
hmm
it's literally just her and that dog, and I felt so sorry for her.
yeah, and uh, she just loves that dog so much. It's really cute the way that there's never a sense of like patronizing. Like I feel like all three of the vets love that dog too. They
Yeah,
love Tricki so much.
yeah, they're totally invested.
Yeah.
Um, and I also love how the the dog, its real name is Derek, and it's on the IMDb page.
Yeah, that's true.
It's so funny. He's like a proper member of the cast.
Yeah. Derek. It's like
I love when people name their animals like human names. A dog
it's
named
like
Ryan or something random.
yeah, it's like in red, white, and royal blue because the
Oh
dog
yeah, yeah,
David.
David, yeah.
Little on the nose, don't you think? Yeah, and they don't even really realize that Mrs. Pumphrey is alone.
hmm
They it doesn't even really occur to them until they're watching Tricki, and then they realize that she is alone.
hmm
And that can be a hard thing of the holidays, is the loneliness that can happen. That not everybody has a family. Not everybody has a place to go,
hmm
and that can be very hard. But before I started Hallmarkies podcast, my parents at the time lived in California, and I didn't really have anybody. There were some friends, some cousins, some things like that, but it was pretty lonely. And I remember just feeling like I'm really pretty down, like right around like 2014, 2015, those sort of years, feeling pretty down about Christmas, that,
Yeah.
and it is hard, even if you're with family, when you don't have kids around in your life,
hmm
Christmas is just not as fun. It's just not the same when you're just with a whole bunch of adults. And uh or you don't have some like project that you can really sink your teeth in. And I know what that's I've spent, because even when my parents lived here, a lot of times they were gone for they were one of my other siblings that have kids for Christmas, which I totally understand. But there were many a Christmas where I've been basically alone. But I mean, usually we end up celebrating early or late, or something else like that. But it's a thing. It can be hard.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've pretty much just got my parents. I am single
Hmm
and I've never really wanted kids, so that's just
hmm
never been, and we don't have any sort of kids
Yeah,
family in that sort of way either. So yeah, it is something that, and there's so much pressure on it as well.
yeah.
There's so much pressure that's sort of fed to you that it's such a happy time of year, and it's such a sometimes you just don't feel that, and I think
hmm
that that's
Yep.
okay, and that needs to be a little bit more normalized of
Yeah.
like, sometimes people are alone,
hmm
and different circumstances for different people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and technically you can be lonely and be surrounded by people. Loneliness is just part of life that can be hard, and it just be amplified because of the holidays and the pressure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
And you can feel that with Mrs. Pumphrey, and at least she has Tricki to some companionship.
Yeah. And it was
Yeah.
nice to see the town show up for her in a way that she has, we don't really know much about her backstory, but we have seen her sort of in the previous episodes, throwing big events and invite people
Yeah.
to her home and the cricket event and things like that.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So she's
true.
not so much like this, like weird sort of, I don't know, she's not just
She's
this sort of weird scary woman up in a house all on her own and
yeah,
sort
or
of staying
like
to
this
herself.
aloof socialite like this. She's not at all. And so that basically becomes kind of our happy ending, is that they decide, they're picking between these two lunches, and they decide to instead combine them and all take them up to Mrs. Pumphrey's. And that was just such a sweet story.
Yeah, and especially because her house was properly closed, like there wasn't even like light coming into her
Yeah.
house, and everything
Yeah.
was sort of
And she didn't
covered
have like
and
a Christmas tree. She didn't have any. And so they bring that, they decorate it, all of that. Just
I think that
really
was,
sweet.
a nice thing of what we're talking to of like this woman who is, in a mansion, by the outside probably seems like she has everything, but she was the only one that was like properly on her own.
Yeah.
Not by choice.
Yeah.
We do see that Dorothy is on her own and she's quite happy about that.
Mhm.
But there was definitely a lot of loneliness coming off of Mrs. Pumphrey in this episode.
Well, and so we also have Tristan and like you said, Maggie. And what's interesting is, so he finds out that she's engaged
Mhm.
after there's the little kiss under the mistletoe. And she says basically, like, you're a fun one. You're not somebody that I even think about settling down with.
hmm And I think that's fair because he's never given her anything to think that he wants anything more than a fun night.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I do like when we have storylines of like a character like Tristan who
Mm-hmm.
does sort of, settle down and find someone that he can see a future with, and the sort of, yeah, I'm trying to think of
Mm-hmm.
like a good example of one that's happened that I really enjoyed, but I do like that aspect of having a character like that sort of fall in love. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily think that it was going to be Maggie, but I do hope that we do see that for Tristan at some point. Like I
Yeah.
do wish that we get to see him like fall in love with someone the way that we've seen people sort of fall in love with him.
Mm-hmm.
But I do
Well,
like the
and
Maggie's sort of smart enough to realize that she's just going to waste her time if she waits around for him.
mm-hmm.
Like she's got more worth than that. She's got more
Mm-hmm.
self-worth than that to realize that she deserves more
Mm-hmm.
than he's willing to give her at that point.
Well, and I think it's an eye-opening moment for him, because I don't think he really realizes that he gives off that impression. Like, I think
Yeah.
he thinks, oh, I'm just being, a fun guy,
Yeah, he's a bit of
young
a
person. And
yeah,
he's like, oh, I gotta grow up.
yeah. He's a bit of a Jack the Lad, and I think this is definitely his sort of like, yeah, I'm done
Mm-hmm.
with college. I'm, starting a career. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm grown up and I have to sort of um grow up properly
Yeah.
in my life and not just
Yeah. So it was a good moment for the character. And speaking of college, so he gets his acceptance letter. And of course, last time uh, Siegfried had hid it from him, and that was the big plot of the last Christmas movie. And the one thing about this is, I do feel like he wouldn't have been able to keep it, like his excitement, the way he just reads it and no emotion at all. I mean, it was effective because you did think, oh, he really didn't get in, but it was also like, would he really have that reaction? Like, I feel like he wouldn't be able to contain it.
yeah, it was definitely some, well done emotional manipulation on this on the part of the show. Yeah, they were definitely like, let's play this out for an entire hour.
Because not only did he passed with honors, like exceptional. So I don't know. I just feel like he would start like screaming and yelling. He'd be so excited.
Also think there's an aspect of Tristan that would be like, how can he rub this into Siegfried as much as he possibly could as well? There's like, I do think he would get satisfaction in dragging it out.
Yeah.
Just to torture Siegfried.
We'd like to take a second and thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast. It's the Hallmarkies merch store.
Are you looking for that perfect gift for the postable, Hardy, or Hallmarky in your life?
What about getting that t-shirt or hoodie that will help you stand out at your next holiday party?
Now is the time to check out the Hallmarkies merch store.
Full of festive designs by artists like Jessica Miller, Carrie from Hallmark Comics, and more.
You can even have more than just shirts, but totes, cell phone cases, notebooks, mugs, and more.
And it isn't just Hallmark. We have designs for Anna Green Gables, Man from Snowy River, The Nanny, and more.
Every purchase at the merch store goes to help support the podcast and allows us to make the great content you know and love.
There are frequent sales, so go to tpublic.com/stores/hallmarkies or see the link in the description.
That's tpublic.com/stores/hallmarkies.
One thing that was interesting is that I didn't realize that Just the Way You Look Tonight was a vintage song.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I didn't realize that was that old.
Yeah, I'm sure I've heard it in that sort of version of it. But yeah, it's definitely more of a modern sounding song.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely one of my favorite songs.
Because what was that, like 1938 or something that we're in now? Like that.
Yeah, I didn't know that was such an old song. It was such a swoon-worthy scene, though. With, you have Helen and James and just everybody, all the little romances going on with Just the Way You Look Tonight. But yeah, I mean, the Frank Sinatra. So I knew it was like the 50s. I just didn't realize that it was.
There it is.
1936. So I guess it would have been. Let me see here. 1936. Jerome Kern. Words by Dorothy Fields, written for Swing Time, the movie, 1936. Mike Bublé has a great version of this song. So that was kind of fun, and I thought very effective. You also have Siegfried telling Diana, let's not complicate things. And she says, how about you coming over for a nightcap? Like, ooh, scandal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll get that. We'll get Tristan and Maggie
having
we've got Tristan and Maggie having one last fun night. Yeah. It's about as scandalous as they can get.
Yeah. Well, and so we also get James telling Helen that they're going to be living at Skelsdale House at the vet.
Yeah.
And that they've talked about it, and they'll have, I mean, I feel like they could have just a house nearby. Their own.
I feel like that might eventually be the thing, but yeah, I think the idea of just having them all in the same house is just like, I think like
it's
that
perfect
might
for
just
the
be
show.
Yeah, it's perfect for the show, and it provides so much like chaos. Them just all being on top of each other, because there would be like so many people in that house living there.
Like, obviously once they have children and stuff, they would need their own home. But and they have phones at this era, so if there was an emergency, you just call them and send them.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why James says that they can't stay at the farm, because they don't have a phone. So they would have to either get a phone installed. Even then, he would be so far away from certain things, so he would have to have like a whole, would it make sense for him to get a call in the middle of the night, then have to go to Skeldo House for the medication, then have to go to, so it definitely makes more sense for them. Yeah.
Well, so then we have also with Tricki, they give him the anesthesmy, it kind of knocks him out.
Mm.
And then there's this, they have to just wait, and it's very tense. And then they give the adrenaline, and you really felt these characters just hanging on everything. And that was, it was very, very effective.
Yeah, they sort of
Yeah.
duplicate what James did with the sheep earlier in the episodes.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that is a scary thing of like we've tried everything and this is just sort of our last Hail Mary to just, put the dog under and hope that his little body's like strong enough to fight it off on his own.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. And so then the scene when Tristan finally does announce his acceptance, very sweet, because Siegfried's like, don't worry, there's lots of other professions you can do.
Yeah, it's so funny. It was like one of the like Tristan Siegfried arguments that I've actually like laughed all the way through.
Yeah.
So it's like we can't be nice to each other for like more than a few seconds. They've got to like have an argument.
Well, and then Tristan says, thank you for all the money, time, and patience you put into it, or money and time. That's very sweet. I love that. And they just do have a very sweet relationship. But it's definitely one that I can connect with because I have such younger siblings.
Mm.
So I can see a lot of truth in it. And then they go and they bring the lunch over to Mrs. Pumphrey, and she says, I shall never forget your kindness. So
Oh,
sweet.
it's so good. Yeah, it was such a good ending.
Yeah. And it was perfect because for most of the episode, it was like nothing's really happening. Like this is a lot of like we need to add to the plot, but there wasn't like a real arc to the episode. And
That's when
then
you know the show is good, when it's not doing much, but you're still
yeah,
like so invested.
that's true. That's true. But this really everything came full circle
Mm.
and you had those Christmas feels.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I do love the way that they change the opening credits and things like that. Like they really do make it feel like a special occasion.
Yeah, and the beautiful music was great too. And so they've also had throughout the course of the episode, they've been talking about James and his parents and will they want him to call, and Mrs. Hall says, of course they're gonna want you to call your parents. And so finally he does call and uh says, I know you have to be there. They say, I know you have to be there, but we still miss you. And then he says, I always be so grateful for everything you do for me. That was very sweet.
It was so sweet, yeah.
Yeah.
Do get the sense that they did sacrifice a lot for him to have the education that he got. But yeah.
Yeah.
It just made me so happy that things have changed of like them all queuing up outside the phone box, just waiting on their turn to speak to someone, and
yeah,
it was so
sweet.
difficult.
And I also really liked the little moment where Siegfried and Mrs. Pumphrey play Gloria, the carol. That was fun on the piano.
That was really sweet. Yeah,
it was very, very sweet. And then this one, James burns the log, and then he quotes "Odd Lang Syne," and that was nice. And then we do. This is where we see they're listening to the broadcast. Mrs. Hall sees the plane, the war plane, and
and I like the way that they've done this. It's so like it's just like this pit in your stomach every time you sort of see it. And I do like the fact that they've had Mrs. Hall be the one that's sort of recognizing all of this and her looking at, her boys essentially, like how much this is going to destroy them and change things. Like that, like dread, you can just sort of feel it.
And in the end, was that Santa in the moon that they show?
I didn't catch that.
Was it a plane? I thought
it was
looked like was it a plane?
It was a plane, yeah.
I couldn't tell. I was like, oh, either way, it added just this little bit of whimsy to the end, I thought. It kind of looked like Santa, but I wasn't sure.
I'll have to go back and look now.
But it was a great episode. 10 out of 10. Wonderful. Brought all the Christmas feels. And it made me excited to start season 3. And
Oh, I'm so excited. Yeah,
so good.
I'm so excited. There's just the episode 3 of season 3.
Yeah.
Episode 3 is one of the best episodes of television ever,
So
in my
good.
opinion. It's so good.
Yeah.
And it's so good. Like, I can't wait to talk about it.
Yeah. Well, let us know what you think of this Christmas special. We would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section or on Twitter. And Michelle, where can people find you?
On Twitter at Michelle R. Benson.
Great. And you can find me at Rachel's Reviews, all over social media, iTunes, YouTube, and on Rotten Tomatoes. So check that out. Also, make sure that you're following the podcast at Hallmarkies Pod and Hallmarkies Podcast. All of our social media will have a playlist with all of our All Creatures Great and Small content. So make sure to check that out. And if you are listening on iTunes, please leave your ratings and reviews 5 stars. That really, really helps us a lot, especially as the holidays season is starting. We can use those recommendations so much. And then if you are watching on YouTube, please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Most of our viewers on YouTube aren't subscribers. So if you're in that camp, please subscribe. It really helps the algorithm a lot and would help us a lot. So please do that. And then we also have our patron group and merch store. And so you can help us with that. And thanks so much, everybody. Merry Christmas. We'll talk to you later. Bye.